On today's show, we are going to discuss how the Florida Panthers have set themselves up for the future, that they are just scratching the surface as part of being a destination franchise. Spencer Knight has made a public appearance. We are going to discuss our thoughts about that, and we're going to preview Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Tuesday, June 13th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers and on Instagram as well at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, it's a game day on this Tuesday, which we know what the situation is with the Florida Panthers, with their backs up against the wall, with a chance to bring this back home to Sunrise. But it's given me a little bit, even regardless of whether the Florida Panthers win or lose on Tuesday, to just really think about and have a lot of gratitude about how they've made it this far and how they've set themselves up for the future. And this will be a great time to bring in my guest on the show for today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. A real big resume here for my guest here. He is from Miami Mic'd Up, the Dan LeBatard Show with Stugotz, producer of the Too Many Men podcast, and UCF alum Jeremy Tache. Jeremy, welcome to Locked On Panthers.
Thank you so much for having me, Armando. Not the best time to associate with a name like the Knights as a UCF guy, as we're all here for the Panthers, but very grateful to be here, excited to talk with you about everything that we have in store.
It's funny because you have an FIU alum here, the Panthers, and a UCF. So Panthers
yeah, that's
and Knights
funny.
and all that.
Yeah, Panthers and Knights on one podcast. That all works out great.
So it's crazy how that works. And hey, we were even speaking off camera on Saturday night about the great food items over at near the UCF, and we spoke all about Lazy Moon, a great pizza place. If you
best pizza place in the country, I love it there.
And
I love Lazy Moon.
Have you ever been to Teak Neighborhood Grill as well in Orlando?
Ooh, no, I haven't. Now I'll go back the next time I'm there.
Next time you go, you have to go. There's one near Universal, one in Maitland, so you gotta definitely check that out. So
I'll be texting you, asking you about it the next time I go up to Orlando.
No doubt. But you are very, very in tune with the South Florida sports scene, of course, with the Miami Mic'd Up podcast. But before we actually get to that, I gotta ask you a question. What's something recently outside of sports that has brought you joy?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you for asking. So for those here who don't know, that is the question that I start each and every Miami Mic'd Up with. We've done over 100 episodes now, and honestly, the answers are almost always my favorite part of the interview. I would say for me, I just recently put an offer in on a house, to buy a house with my fiance. And it's simultaneously something that's brought me a bunch of joy and also something that's brought me a lot of dread because it is so scary to, I was talking about it with Billy Gill here, where it's like you walk in, you spend your entire life being told, hey, be careful with your money, don't overexert yourself on anything, don't overspend, don't make rash decisions with your money. And then the way that we purchase homes as a society is walk into this house for 5 minutes, decide if you'd like to live in it, and then commit hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 30 years of your life to buying it. So it's a very stressful experience, but also it's brought me a lot of joy just because to be at this point with my fiance and to be able to look at like our future and hopefully being down here in South Florida for a very long time, if not forever, it's something that's brought me joy. So thank you for asking.
But- and obviously I wanted to get that part of it with you asking players all the time and all your various guests on Miami mic'd up that question. So a little bit of flavor here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But you're very in touch with the South Florida sports scene, especially with your work with the Miami Marlins recently with Swings and Missions, and of course doing your post-game interviews for Miami Heat games on Bally Sports Sun. But you, of course, with the Panthers making this run towards the Stanley Cup Final, and of course, South Florida is a very event-driven region with everything that goes on here, the tourist stuff that goes on. But how has your impression been on this Florida Panthers run as they're here in the Stanley Cup Final?
You know, it's been amazing, and right now I live in Fort Lauderdale, and Fort Lauderdale in a lot of ways is like, it's Panther country. Like there's signs all up through. It's Panthers territory, as we would say. But there's all sorts of signs throughout. You know, you drive down Broward Boulevard and you can see Panthers Stanley Cup, and like it's really cool, and you can feel the energy, like in a way where, you know, if you're out at a sports bar on a given night, you can hear people actually know who the players are on the team in a way that, you know, hasn't resonated necessarily in years past, except for maybe one or two. You know, Matthew Tkachuk is like really turning himself into a superstar in this market. And what's been so fun about it is, like, obviously this has all been in conjunction with what the Heat have been doing. And watching these 2 8 seeds make a run where the Panthers are very much hanging in the same conversation as the Miami Heat, a premier franchise in the NBA. You know, the Panthers have turned themselves into a premier franchise in the NHL. The best team in the regular season last year, making it to a Stanley Cup Final now. 2 key pieces in Barkov and Tkachuk, who are now, you know, going to lead this franchise into the future in their primes. And so it's really exciting, you know, to see this type of run from this team and to feel the energy. You know, the thing that excites me the most is if the Panthers are able to come home with a Game 5 win, like, it is going to be electric at FLA Live Arena. And to see the way that the fan base has supported, you know, like I have some friends who, because I grew up in suburbia near FLA Live Arena, some friends whose families have had season tickets for, you know, 10, 15 years and have been around since, you know, some of the years where this franchise was struggling a lot, to now see them at these games and just soaking in, like, these are sellouts. This is one of the best atmospheres you can find. You know, these are people who are really passionate about their hockey, and the Panthers in a large way have turned South Florida into an area that actually has grown to understand the game of hockey in a way that I don't think anybody ever thought that we would. And there's still a long way to go, but this is such an incredible step in taking the Panthers from a franchise that people pay attention to only when XYZ big storyline is happening, and now turning them into, like, this is a premier franchise in the NHL. This has a couple of premier players in the NHL. It's a place that everybody wants to be, and that's a huge part that we can get into if you'd like. But this is a special time to be a fan of the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, and I think of even before the Matthew Tkachuk trade, just a few years ago when they were playing against the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2021, where they lost in 6 games. And Joe Thornton, even though he was 43 years old, 44 at the time when he was playing in Toronto, he was talking about how when the Toronto Maple Leafs weren't playing their playoff series against the Montreal Canadiens, the one series he was paying attention to was that Florida Panthers versus Tampa Bay Lightning series. And signing a 1-year deal last year with the Florida Panthers and even playing in that tail end of that Lightning series as well, it even shows that is just one example of veterans as well. We talk about the first trade that Bill Zito made with Patrick Hornquist as well. And it's just the building blocks of this team over and over again. And then Matthew Tkachuk was the later piece, like not necessarily the icing on the cake because they haven't won the cup yet, but it's kind of like putting those things all together.
But icing on the cake in terms of taking this from a destination that some people wanted to be into a legitimate top-level premier destination, right? You know, you could be in a position where, you know, you've got a team that's good, that's solid, that's winning regular season games, that, oh, it's a fun place to go to South Florida. But when you bring in one of the, you know, 5 best players in the NHL, and you're able to now pitch people on playing with him and playing around someone like Alexander Barkov, who just wants to make the players around him better, let alone now the fact that you can come down to a place that, doesn't have horrible weather all year long and isn't in the middle of nowhere necessarily. These guys are going out on Las Olas on the weekends in Fort Lauderdale, and most of them are living out there. Like, it's a major selling point to be a Florida Panther right now. And what you've seen in the last number of years, like you just mentioned, guys like Joe Thornton, guys like Patrick Hornquist, that are now turning around and speaking to other players throughout the league about the positive experience that they've had down here. That's what turns you into a free agent destination. It's the combination of all of those things. New infrastructure that they're building in Fort Lauderdale right now with their practice arena. Making themselves the team of Fort Lauderdale, bringing in a superstar like Matthew Tkachuk, building around him and Barkov, having playoff success, being in an area like South Florida. There are a countless number of reasons to believe that this franchise is only going to continue to ascend from here, whether they're able to come back and win the Stanley Cup this year or not.
Yeah, and with $10 million at their disposal as of right now, because I haven't really spoken about this on the show because we've been so into the Stanley Cup Final, but the NHL did say how the cap is only going to go up $1 million next year, so around 10-11 million cap space, still able to make free agent moves, maybe get a Dmitry Orlov in free agency. Maybe Tom Wilson is 1 year away from being a free agent, so maybe the Panthers could try to trade for him. He was very similar to that jerk on the ice like Matthew Tkachuk is as well, that maybe the Panthers could possibly go after in the summer as well. So Bill Zito definitely likes to get grinders on his team, that's for sure. But we're going to transition to segment number 2. We're going to discuss a public appearance by Spencer Knight over the weekend, and there were some thoughts on the internet, and Jeremy and I are going to give our thoughts here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about eBay Motors. And for a championship team, getting all the right parts is very crucial. So this is the time to head to eBay Motors, and you can be sure every part fits right for the first time around. Just add your ride to my garage and look for the green check mark so you know the part will fit or your money back. Because like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at ebaymotors.com. With over 122 parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Segment number 2 here on this Tuesday, June 13th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I have Jeremy Tache of Bally Sports Florida here on the show. And Jeremy, yesterday, just casually scrolling Twitter, and of course, with the season winding down, regardless of what happens in Game 5, there's still a draft to be conducted, regardless of the Panthers' lack of assets in the draft, and of course, a free agency period, and of course, looking at your goaltending situation as well. But there was a picture that surfaced on the internet of Spencer Knight at the Belmont Stakes this weekend with his World Junior teammate Trevor Zegras of the Anaheim Ducks. And there's a tweet sent out. I'm not going to say the name of the fan. When I posted it, I actually crossed out the username because I'm not in the business of embarrassing people as well. Since then, the tweet has been deleted. So if people want to even search it, they can't find it unless they see a screenshot. But I'm gonna read what the tweet says. And the quote says, quote, "This is not in any way meant to diminish whatever Spencer Knight has been dealing with this year, but going to the Belmont Stakes with your buds while your team is in the Cup Final and you're still supposedly in the NHL assistance program, ? Close quote. And listen, it's been a while since, of course, Spencer Knight has been with the team. And of course, we've seen a few players go to the players' assistant programs, like a Carey Price for the Montreal Canadiens, Jacob Vrana with the Detroit Red Wings prior to being traded to St. Louis. And I think ever since COVID-19, I think really mental health has been more of an emphasis, of course, with more isolation, which can be very damaging to us if you're if you're not hanging around your buddies and even getting out of the house. And regardless of everything, let's also remind ourselves, if you're in the players assistance program, you can't be around the team until you're cleared. So let's get that out of the way first.
Right.
So my thoughts of it was, is he supposed to be in his house this whole time and just lock himself up in a room and not be around people? And I'm not going to blame Trevor Zegras for posting a picture. It's his Instagram. It's not mine. So what is your take on the public appearance for Spencer Knight? And of course, what do you think of the possible of him having a sense of community with a few friends?
Yeah, so I think the Spencer Knight conversation is obviously layered and complicated.
Yes.
When you're dealing with anybody entering a player assistance program, I don't know, and I haven't seen any level of reporting, and maybe I'm wrong here, on exactly why he entered the players assistance program. I don't believe we have those details. And so there's a whole bunch of different reasons that Spencer could be in that program. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons why he could be, at this point, doing totally fine and just not cleared to go back to hockey at the moment, mind you, considering the Panthers are in the Stanley Cup. Maybe now's not the time to clear somebody and have them go back out to something like this after going through something like the Players Assistant Program. And so for me, I was made really, really sad when I saw Spencer enter into the Players Assistance Program, because whether it was, and again, not to be speculative, but whether it was dealing with some sort of issue with like drugs or dealing with mental health, because more likely than not, those are the two different things that would get you into one of these programs. It made me profoundly sad, actually, going back to our conversation from Miami Mic'd Up right before the season. And this is not about a plug. That's not why I'm doing this. That is super self-serving, and that's not what I meant. It's just simply out of, I think, of the conversation that we had. This is a now 22-year-old kid. He was 21 at the time of this conversation. And when I asked him, what's brought you joy outside of work? It was, I got to spend the summer with my friends. It was him saying, this has been quite the whirlwind the last couple of years. I'm a college-aged kid who has not gotten to be a college-aged kid. I had to be a professional over the last year and play in some of the biggest games of my life and be around all of these grown adult men who have been professionals for years, who are helping me, learn how to be said professional. But it was nice to just be a kid for the summer and get to hang out with my friends and go to baseball games and, sit around outside in the backyard. And I was so, truthfully, taken aback by not only what Spencer had to say, but the demeanor in which he said it. He's so cerebral. He's so calm. And he is clearly an incredibly deep thinker. Because when I came back to him and said, like, oh man, that's got to be interesting, being rushed into, adulthood and this and that, we just continued that conversation for a few minutes, because he seemed to be very much in the mindset of like, yeah, this is a difficult thing to do. And to leave your family and your friends at a young age and just immediately be thrust into like these huge moments, it is a burden. It is something that's heavy. It is something that is, as fun as it is, as much as it's a dream come true, there's a lot of pressure associated with that. And so he was grateful to have some time to kind of just goof off. And so now you look forward a few months and Spencer enters the player assistance program, and I couldn't help but feel just like this just major, just like gut punch of, oh my God, whatever this kid is going through, it's so hurtful and it's so deep, and it's so hard to think that whatever was going on drove him either to drug use or a level of mental health strain that he felt the need to enter this program. And so when I look at someone like that, who my first concern, and I'm sure most Panthers fans' concern, was worry for the human being, I look at a moment like this and I see Spencer out with a friend at something like the Belmont Stakes. My first reaction was like, oh my God, amazing, awesome. Like, he's not a part of this Stanley Cup Final run. He'll be back, you know?
Mm-hmm.
He'll be back when he's ready to be back. And I'm so glad that he's out with a friend, having a positive, good moment at something that seems like a lot of fun, you know? And I don't know what his journey has been over the last few months. I'm sure in a couple of months from now, we'll start to get some of the details of what Spencer Knight has gone through in the last few months. But to me, my initial reaction, based off of all the things I just told you, thinking of this cerebral, soft-spoken, kind, sweet child, 22-year-old, he's a kid, he's a college kid. To think of that guy and to watch him now, after whatever the hell he's been through over the last few months, to come back and not be with the team, no, but to be out at an event having a good time, it made me smile. And to me, look, I understand. It's the Stanley Cup, every competitive advantage you can get. It's not like Bob has been at his tip-top shape over the last few games. He's been good. He gave him a chance to win in Game 4. But it's not like he's been as dominant as he was in the previous couple of series, and it's Panthers fans grasping at straws like, come on, we need everything we can get. Let Spencer be a kid for a year, man. Let this guy get his stuff together and not just get his stuff together, but thrive. You know, I never want to see somebody who's hanging on by a thread just to be in the league because they're skilled enough to do it, you know, and this conversation spans across sports, man. Like, we can look at the John Morant situation, which he's done some like really horrible, reckless stuff, right? But I also look there and I'm like, that's a 23-year-old who was basically given the world overnight. And all of a sudden in the last couple of years has just grown into this level of superstardom that, of course, like, rock stars have reckless behavior all the time. Why wouldn't some young athlete who's been given, you know, the world? And so that's not what Spencer Knight did. Spencer Knight has not been this, you know, reckless guy with guns and stuff like that the way John Morant has. He's just checked into a player assistance program. But in that same vein of, these are young people early on in their lives, man. I'm 28 and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. You know, I'm 5 years ahead of these guys, 6 years ahead of these guys, and I don't know what I'm doing. So the idea that we have these major expectations for people to be finished products at such a young age, to me is a shame. And I think that we should just be constantly supporting, you know, people like Spencer Knight.
Yeah, and the fact that with the platform, you're under a little bit more of a microscope as well in that type of situation. So things can get a little nitpicky for certain people. And we once again hope that Spencer Knight is getting the healing that he deserves as he's trying to make his way back. And thankfully, when the Stanley Cup Final is over, there'll still be 2.5 months more of Spencer Knight getting that time off to heal emotionally before, and also the development curve that goes through your brain when specifically a man's brain doesn't develop until really age 25, and he's still 3 years away from it. And like, going back to your comments about not knowing what you're doing, a lot of us in life, we don't know what we're doing. We're just winging it. So,
Right.
at least that's how I feel as an almost 30-year-old man too.
And think about it. I mean, like, think about being Spencer, right? Who's brought in essentially as like the savior at that position, comes in and has immediate success, and then goes through the rapid ups and downs of what being a professional athlete is. And he's done all of that by the time he's 21 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, that's emotionally exhausting. And
No doubt.
And to have the pressure of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not potentially millions of fans of your team, of your league, of millions of dollars that are riding on what you do and your performance. I mean, I can't imagine it. We're sitting around here doing this podcast and I've got butterflies going through my stomach, right? Like, and this is just a singular podcast that ultimately has no bearing on whether or not you and I ultimately get to succeed in the rest of our lives, this individual podcast. And yet, every move Spencer Knight made in those playoff games was going to be major dictation over how millions of dollars exchanged hands all over the world in betting on these sports. Like, there's so much pressure in being an athlete. And I think we just need to have the empathy for young people that, like, they deserve the chance to grow as human beings.
No doubt. And as we like to say, going to therapy is definitely cool. That's for sure.
It is cool. It is cool. Going to therapy is cool. Highly recommended for anybody.
Hashtag end the stigma. So let's park this conversation here, and we're gonna transition over to segment number 3, where we're gonna talk about a hockey game as the Florida Panthers are getting ready for Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final in Las Vegas. We're gonna discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I love that little jingle. Sorry to interrupt you, but I love that little jingle. It's great. I love it.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, my friend. I chose that jingle mostly because I'm a metalhead and rock and roll music is just
vibes, baby. I love it
for sure. But so segment number 3 here on this Tuesday, June 13th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Sports Florida here, and we're gonna preview Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final between the Florida Panthers and the Vegas Golden Knights. So, I spoke about it with Alex Baumgartner of the 5 Reasons Sports Network yesterday. The Panthers are going to head into game number 103 of the season tonight against the Vegas Golden Knights, and there's not much we could take out of practice going into things, because these guys have we spoke about the purposes of it is just to keep your legs warm and just to keep it going. But maintenance days are a thing for this team, and the guys not taking the ice: Matthew Tkachuk, Radko Gudas, Nick Cousins, and Eetu Luostarinen. But Eetu hasn't played all series long for the Panthers here, so I'm going to assume that those guys are going to play. Just getting some treatment off the ice with the medical trainers. So not even really a point to talk about really the practice lines, because I think that's going to change big time come game time. But Grigory Denisenko is with the team going into with the team to Vegas. So chances are he could be in the lineup over Zach Dalpe on that 4th line. You could create a little bit of a spark there, possibly, even though he's still a young player. He's going to be an RFA this year. And a little bit going back to Spencer Knight, they took care of their biggest RFA going into this year, and now the second biggest one, now the priority becomes Grigory Denisenko. So that's a good thing that they took care of him last year. But I think of the situation for the Florida Panthers and Vegas Golden Knights. The cup is going to be in the building. I mean, it has been in the building. It's just a chance to be presented. And I think of the hype that's going to happen. The pregame ceremonies in Vegas, which is elite when it comes to the whole NHL. And I could also see how the Panthers can just take that and just run with it, as far as it could be too much pressure for the home team to clinch at home. But of course, Vegas has had chances to clinch all playoffs long, with the exception of the Western Conference Final, where they lost 2 in a row and then they finally won it in 6. But so many things need to go right, Jeremy. Bob needs to be Superman, just like how he was in Game 3, setting him up to win, even though he gave him a chance in Game 4. Penalties, even though they only took 1 in Game 3, they still haven't scored a power play goal. 0 for 13. And here's another one: bottom 6 contribution for the forward lines, because there's still going to be a little bit of a juggle, but you're going against a bottom 6 unit that has Chandler Stevenson, who scored 2 goals, and Mark Stone, who's a great defensive forward for the Vegas Golden Knights. And as far as generating chances against for the Vegas Golden Knights, the unit, that the line that has allowed the most chances generated has been that top line of Eichel and Ivan Barbashev on that line as well. So maybe a little bit of a chance with the line shakeups for the Panthers, with Lundell going up there. Maybe there's a chance for as far as matchups, even though the Vegas Golden Knights do have the last change in Game 5, but I think that the Panthers are going to, in fact, stick with that Lundell going on that top line. Jameson Olive did have that as like the practice line. So what do you what are your thoughts going into this game for the Panthers?
This is going to be quite the hurdle, obviously. You're trying to take it one game at a time, one period at a time, one shift at a time, all of the sort of corny phrasing that we'll hear from players and coaches throughout, where it's all about just one moment at a time. But this is a big thing to overcome. You're down 3-1, and I think the thing that we've all noticed about Vegas is that they just don't make a lot of mistakes. This is a team that's just really good at everything. There's teams that the Panthers have played that are better at individual parts of the game of hockey than the Knights are at pretty much anything. But the Knights have been sensational and refuse to hurt themselves. And so I think the thing that you can sort of hold your hat on if you're the Panthers is, I think most people would argue that Vegas has thoroughly outplayed Florida throughout this series. Obviously, they have a 3-1 lead. Yet, on the same token, even a game like last game, you're right in it until the very end, and you gave yourself a chance. You look at Game 3. Game 3 was another example. They were down, and in the final moments, they found their way to win. That's what this team has done all postseason long, is sort of just find a way to win. They're 7-0 in overtime, which is just like a mind-blowing stat to think about, that in the postseason you could go 7-0 in overtime against so many great teams. And so that's the sort of the thing that you start to look at, which is, can Bob, play at least as well as he did in Game 4 to give your team a chance? And, the biggest thing with the Panthers that's kind of tough is, like, and they're very banged up. Like, Matthew Tkachuk is very clearly, like, not just hurt, he's injured. And there's a difference between being hurt and injured. That guy is injured. Like, he's dealing with more than one ailment. And that changes so much, man. We're talking about one of the best players in all of hockey. One of the most well-rounded players in all of hockey. And a guy who has been literally, outside of maybe Sergei Bobrovsky, the biggest reason why you're in this situation. So to have him down, to have him sort of battling through stuff, to have anybody at this point in the NHL season is battling through injuries. But, it's clearly impacting those Florida Panthers in a way that at the moment Vegas has been able to overcome. And, it's hard. It's hard to see a major adjustment that could be made that can change too much. But again, you look at these teams, and you see, even as Vegas has outplayed Florida, Florida's found their way to stick around. And to me, I look at it and I say, all right, guys, they're going to be feeling themselves. Like you mentioned, there's going to be this entire pregame show festivity. Vegas is going to be rocking. They're looking at their first possible championship. They're looking at this as an opportunity to shine. And I do think that if the Panthers come out with a level of physicality and focus early in this game and can kind of throw the first punch, you wonder if, and maybe I mean that both literally and proverbially, throw the first punch, but if they can do that early and take an early lead, they haven't been playing with early leads very much at all. If they can take an early lead against the Golden Knights in this Game 5, well, then maybe the Golden Knights start to feel the pressure of their home crowd, and you can get yourself back to Florida for a Game 6, and all of a sudden you start finding a path, right? Because FLA Live for a Game 6 would just be electric. Like, I'm desperate for the Panthers to get it back here because it would be such an unbelievable atmosphere. And then if you get to a Game 7, all the pressure shifts to Vegas, and you're playing with house money and having a good time and probably playing some pretty good hockey. So, you're looking at the same sort of formula there for the Panthers as the one as, transparently, I'll just say it and you can edit it out if we need to, but as we record this on Monday afternoon, we don't have the result yet in hand for the Heat, but it's the same sort of path of, can you go on the road, take a Game 5, and then shift all of the pressure onto the other team, because now you're at home for Game 6, you can ride that momentum and potentially get yourself into a situation where, all right, yeah, we got to go on the road for Game 7, but all of the pressure is on the opponent.
Yeah, and my screen sharing is having a little bit of a struggle here, and I'm just looking at the 5-on-5 goals for the Florida Panthers and the Vegas Golden Knights. At 5-on-5, the Florida Panthers in the slot have scored only one goal While for the Vegas Golden Knights, they scored 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Oh.
8 shots from the slot.
I mean,
at
come
5-on-5. So the middle of the
Like-
ice is it's showing in the heat maps on Natural Stat Trick, and we're seeing it and the eye test really shows for this series in it. So that's really what's gonna need to be very important when it comes to the Florida Panthers generating. And I mean, I've talked about even how the Vegas Golden Knights, as far as their D pairs, about even all three pairs have just been able to defend well against around Adin Hill. I mean, the pair of Nicholas Hague and Zach Whitecloud, they were a -3 in Game 3, but then they turn it around and become a +3. I know a plus minus is not the end all be all in that one, but you in that aspect of it, like you up and down the lineup. It's just the depth of this team is just
That's
proven
what's
to be
amazing.
more. Yeah, and the goal differential as far as 5-on-5, as far as forward lines, the best goal differential actually came in 6 minutes and 36 seconds of time on ice when Lundell was placed on that Barkov line. And that
Interesting.
The whole series of 60 plus minutes of hockey times 60 plus minutes of hockey times 4, doing quick math, 240 minutes. And 6 minutes of that is your best goal differential at 5-on-5 with that line. So just goes to show.
Well, clearly you got to make some adjustments. And make it happen. Look, I'm not here. As I've told you, as anybody who's listening to this, it's pretty clear. I'm not exactly the top hockey analyst in terms of the style of game, but I do know how to read some statistics, and I know that when you're looking at a goal differential like that, and you're looking at a team that desperately needs a spark, that's the type of tweak that maybe needs to get made.
Yeah, and it's crazy because Lundell and Barkov during the regular season, they were not playing well together as well. And then you put this little sample size here in the Stanley Cup Final. I don't know if it's too little too late for the Panthers, but I mean, you see that little spark that could bring in with a little bit of confidence. But of course, the number one thing is, how is Matthew Tkachuk going to perform as far as that shoulder injury? And you said it best. He's injured, not hurt, and a big difference for the Panthers there. So you can only hope that he's able to lift the puck off his stick without a grimace, or a very limited grimace for sure. And that's what we hope, that the Panthers can bring it back to South Florida for Game 6 on Friday night. And of course, like you said, we're recording this before the Heat game, so we hope that both teams find their way back to South Florida. Heat on Thursday, hopefully, and the Panthers on Friday. for sure. But I would too. But Jeremy, I want to thank you so much for coming on to this episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Very appreciative of you coming on. Tell everybody where they can find you online and your work.
Armando, first of all, thank you for having me. Seriously, this was super, super fun, and I'll come back anytime. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Tache. Despite Twitter sort of going into a bit of a hellscape, it's still the best place to find me and my work. You should follow the Miami Mic'd Up podcast right now. When you guys are listening to this week, we should have a Panthers guest on, potentially Steve Goldstein. Haven't booked that down with him yet, but potentially Steve Goldstein. Whether the Panthers win or not in Game 5, it'll either be a postmortem on the season, or we will be able to preview a little bit of Game 6 hockey as it comes back to FLA Live Arena. That's pretty much it. Just, listen to Miami Mic'd Up. Follow me on Twitter. You'll find all the stuff from the LeBatard Show, from Too Many Men, from anything else that we're doing. Just pay attention to everything going on with these teams in South Florida. And if anybody listening to this is a Miami Marlins fan, I can promise you that the moment these two seasons end with the Miami Heat and the Florida Panthers, Miami Mic'd Up will turn into what I'd like to believe is your premier Miami Marlins podcast. I know Peter Pratt does an amazing, amazing job with Locked On Marlins. I love him, and I will probably be on that podcast at some point in the next couple of months as well. but I would like to believe that we will do a really great job on Miami Mic'd Up. So if you are a Marlins fan, I'm really excited about what the rest of this season looks like with this team. They're having a lot of fun, and it should be another really great ride. So check it all out. And Armando, thanks again, man. This was a blast.
Thank you. And the Marlins are over 500. They're playing great ball, so that's a great thing. That's great news here. But Jeremy, thank you so much, my friend, and I'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On AHL network, including Locked On AHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And every dayers, make sure to come back for Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where it'll be a post-game show of Game 5 with Jacob Winans on the Winans Wednesday edition of the show. So I'm Armando Velez with Jeremy Tache, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.